It's time for my second Fight Quest episode. Really appreciated the response. Apparently, people want to hear these stories. So, this is number 2, and it was aired first, I believe, but filmed second, if I recall. Kung Fu in China. Dongfeng, China. So, this episode had a really interesting combination for me because having come from. I didn't do martial arts as a kid. I didn't do any traditional martial arts. I wrestled in high school, got into jiu-jitsu when I was in college, started boxing from then, and the only martial art or combat style I had taken up to that point when I started my MMA career was a little bit of boxing. So I hadn't done any traditional martial arts. So this was really, Fight Quest was my first experience with traditional martial arts. I didn't do any of them. So China was, in many ways, the most culturally interesting episode we did for a ton of reasons. And the first thing you notice when you get to China, and it was my first time in China, the scale of population is just beyond what we're used to even in the United States, which is a comparatively populous country. It was just described to me, Dongfeng, China, which is where we were, by our fixer translator as a small city, or like a big town, almost. It has 650,000 people in it, and it's considered tiny by Chinese standards. One of the introductory scenes in this episode, we're walking down the street and we see a school, and there are just kids, thousands of kids, doing a synchronized kung fu routine. Now, Dongfeng is full of kung fu schools, so every school has a kung fu element to it. Like we would do PE, they do kung fu. But just the scale. It was high school, a big high school, and it was an elementary school there. We were in this line of kids. We're going to school, and for some reason, we ended up shooting, and we're surrounded by these kids. I don't remember. I saw that scene. I don't remember. You can't shoot a minor without permission. So apparently, they got permission from somebody at the school to do this. But it was just like they're all walking to school. They're all in formation. It was just so many children. It was crazy. And we're used to elementary schools in the States being comparatively small, and they were just huge there. Middle schools were the size of gigantic high schools in the United States. So the scale really gets you. Second thing is the pollution was really noticeable. There are days when the sky was like brown. So Dongfeng was the first time I was in the country. Well, there was always a division in Fight Quest, country, city. They tried to change it up, and a lot of times the division was country, city. I was country, meaning I went up into the mountains, into the Shaolin Temple. Doug stayed in the city. So they did our introduction where they had this display, and it looked like a kung fu movie. It was crazy. All these people demonstrating these different forms and katas and styles and weapons, and then they were doing the iron head and iron hands and breaking stuff. It was crazy and really fun to watch. Really cool to see this in real life. So they set up this thing. We're in this courtyard, and we see all these kung fu experts. A kung fu movie. That's the only way I can really describe it. It was amazing. It was really awesome to see. So we meet our masters, and my master was a guy named Shi Yang, and he looked like, once again, the abbot of a Shaolin temple in a kung fu movie. Shaved head, wore the robes all the time, and his face was serene almost all the time. And I'm not a hippie energy person. That's not really my thing. When he spoke to you, I don't speak Chinese. When he spoke to you, you understood what he was saying. It was the weirdest thing, where he would look at me and he would say something in Chinese, and my translator would start translating, and I'd go, yeah, I know. It was like, yeah, I get what he's saying. I'm not saying he had communicated with my spirit or any of that shit. What I'm saying is he was amazing at communicating the emotion of what he was saying. You got what he meant. Obviously, I don't know the words. I don't speak Chinese. But you really, when he would speak to me, I was like, I would start nodding like, yeah, I got it. I get it. I understand what you're saying. Even though I don't understand a word of what you're saying. He had that ability. And he was so calm all the time. Really, the stereotypical Zen master. The just at harmony all the time. It was crazy. I remember one time, too, people think you're somehow detached from the modern world, and they're not. It's 21st century. So we were at this big dinner during my training, and he came down, and it was every time we had a dinner in China, like a real dinner, it was the Lazy Susan, 16 courses, table full of all different kinds. That's just how dinner works there, where we were there. And he's sitting there, and we had these two British guys that were there who spoke fluent Chinese. They were kung fu training out there. And they were like cracking up to the point where they were like crying. And the one guy turns to me and he goes, "You don't understand how funny he is." He's like hilarious. My instructor, like, you kind of imagine he'd be this stoic, wise guy, always saying heavy shit. And he did say a lot of heavy shit. But when he wanted to, he was conversational. They were like, he's the funniest guy I've ever been around. And he was like cracking jokes, apparently. And one time they're asking him a question, and he was like, and his phone started ringing. It was like 50 Cent or something. He's like, that was his ringtone. He's like, yeah. And he got the phone, answered it, put it back, and then went back to answering the question. It just reminded you how, they look like they're detached from the modern world, but no one's really detached from the modern world these days. So that was my instructor. He was incredible. Much more to come about him. So we had the demonstration. We meet our respective masters. Doug and I shake hands. I go up to the mountains. He goes to the city. And anyway, he when we got up there, we were like 2 or 3 hours late. And so what happened was we were going up there, and there's this gigantic staircase leading up to this Shaolin temple that's amazing. And I'm going to overuse this phrase. It was like a kung fu movie. Just these stairs up there to this big, huge gate with dragons on either side of this gigantic door, and everything was ancient. And on every step, there were 2 kids, one on each side, in this position, all the way up this staircase. And we were about 2 hours late, simply because it was a TV production. It just takes a long time to get everybody in a van and all the equipment together and all this stuff. And these kids were standing there not moving at all. And our translator, was talking to this one guy who was like kind of the drill instructor for all these kids. And he was barking orders, making sure they were standing straight and all this stuff. And my translator fixer turns to me and goes, "Yeah, they've been standing up there for 2 hours. They thought we were going to be there at noon. We were there at 2 o'clock. They stood there the whole time. They didn't say, well, I guess they're late," and like sit down and wait until they... Nuh-uh. It was like military. They stood there like this for 2 hours waiting for us. That was my first indication of the discipline these kids had and the discipline under which they lived. So anyway, these kids are standing up there, and so I was introduced to my master earlier, so I already knew who he was. But I see the Shaolin Temple. It's an amazing place. I mean, really incredible. Everything is ancient. Everything's wooden. Everything's stone. There are these pillars they use for balance, like to hop over. They had been there for like 1,000 years. It was incredible, the history there. They show me where I'm going to be sleeping and staying. They give me these robes to change into. And I talked a little bit in the first episode about the amount of time we had to train. Your body doesn't adjust to anything. So you try to avoid injuries early on because you didn't have time to rehab anything. If I have an 8-week camp or a 6-week camp to get ready for a fight and I strain my foot the first day of training, okay, I go around it and I rehab it and it's fine in a few days. And we didn't have that in FightQuest at all. We had 5 days of training. So if something hurt or didn't work or you were just screwed because you didn't have time to fix it in the amount of time you had. And so you try to avoid those early injuries. This was a prime example of that. Once again, the kids there ranged from early elementary school to high school. So they've been doing this their entire lives. Everything they're doing. The kung fu drills, the stretching, the flipping, the acrobatics, the weapons training, they've been doing that since they were little kids. They could all stand on one foot, grab their other foot, and put it up over their heads. They could all do that. I, this big gangly white guy who have never done any of that stuff, couldn't do anything like that. So my instructor put me through this stretching routine. And you have to remember, he wasn't used to working with, A, adults, B, people that had a limited amount of time. He was used to kids who have been doing this for years. And the idea that I didn't want to destroy myself when I had to fight in 5 days, that wasn't part of his thought process. So we went through this stretching thing, and I could only put my foot so far. He literally grabbed my foot and just wrenched it the other 6 inches for every stretch we did. He didn't understand why I couldn't do full splits. And so and I'm not flexible in that way anyway. I'm really rigid. The only way I'm flexible is jiu-jitsu flexible. I can put my foot under my chin, right? Rubber guard and stuff. I can do all that stuff for the most part. At least I could when I was younger. But I can't touch my toes. I just have the most inflexible hamstrings you've ever felt in your life. So he just wrenched me down into these positions that I couldn't do. And so I'm trying to like accommodate as much as I can, but I felt my tendons just pulling out, and it just destroyed the first day. The first thing we did was this stretching drill. And the concept that, look, I can't do that, I'm just not that flexible, did not compute. And so I just got pulled into these positions, and by the end I couldn't walk. So I'm hobbling back to my room like, fuck. It's my first day. It's the first stretch of the first day, and he just like totally destroyed my tendons. So I had to combat that the entire time I was there. The entire time I'm just trying to like walk right. And then I had to go through all these calisthenics and stuff. So that was my first day, and it was awful. Now, this was the first shoot in which I lived on site. So I lived at the Shaolin Temple. I had a little room with a little bed. I think that had actually a Hello Kitty blanket on it, if I remember correctly, which was kind of funny. But I lived in like the monk quarters. And so when the crew finished up, we only really filmed during daylight. They didn't have like this giant light set up for us to do night stuff. So we basically filmed sun up to sundown. And then when the sun went down, they left, went back down the mountain to their hotel, and I lived there. So it wasn't fake. I actually lived there, even when we weren't filming. And there were a few shoots in Fight Quest when that's the way it worked. I lived there. I wasn't, at the end of the day, I went to a hotel. Yeah, I lived there the whole time. So that was how it worked in China. I lived like a monk. I ate what they ate. I didn't do anything different. I got up when they got up. So it was a very unique experience in that, for me, it didn't end when the cameras left, because I still lived there. So when it was over, like, I would still do monk stuff. None of the guys in the school spoke English. And my fixer, I don't think he stayed there either. So when the cameras left, he was gone. I can't speak Chinese, but I'm here with all these students and monks and all this stuff, and they can't really communicate with me. So that led to some interesting scenarios, because I don't know what's going on. I had to pantomime my way through everything. Where are we eating? What are we eating? They would just kind of go, food here, and I would follow the line, and I'd eat where they ate, so they would serve this like porridge stuff, and I'd sit there and eat it. So one of the things about destroying my tendons early on in the first day of the shoot, they didn't sit in chairs. They had these like wooden, I want to say benches, but they're not benches. You don't sit on them. They eat on benches, and they squat the whole time. They don't sit in a chair like a Westerner would. They squat on, pretty much on the ground, but they squat on their haunches and eat. I couldn't do that at all, because my tendons were all messed up. And so even like getting around was hard, because they didn't sit in chairs to eat. They squatted down to eat. So everybody squats down, and I got to stand up and eat. And then they didn't have toilets, like Western style toilets. They just had these holes in the ground that you squat over and poop. I couldn't squat because of the tendon injuries. So they had like one Western toilet that was like for guests. I found that, and that's what I would use. So things like that were just an obstacle from the beginning, because I got injured the first day. So the aspect that made this episode challenging and interesting at the same time was there was so much to it, and almost none of it, in my case, had anything to do with my final fight. My final fight was in Sanda, or Sanshu, and that is the style Kung Lee came up in, where you're on this elevated platform, and it's pretty much kickboxing, but you can knock somebody off the platform. Like Bloodsport. If you saw Bloodsport, same thing. They have this like elevated platform that's actually supposed to be shaped like that, and you can knock the person off of it. So we didn't do any of that. They didn't do that at this temple. They didn't study Sanda. They didn't fight Sanshu. They didn't train fighters. That wasn't their thing. The one Doug was at in the city, they did that. They didn't do that at all in the temple I was staying in. So mine was, they wanted me to do a weapons demonstration where I did this bow staff thing with this staff that was like 8 feet long. They wanted me to do some kind of endurance thing, like the iron fist, the iron head, like some chi thing, and I was supposed to fight Sanda. Well, the temple I was living at only did two out of 3 of those things, and one we didn't do at all. So I did the bow staff drill for every day over and over and over. Remember, I never did traditional martial arts. So katas and forms and stuff is goofy to me. If I'm not hitting a real thing, I'm just not used to that. So it's not natural for me. It feels really awkward. I'm not good at it. So that staff thing really freaked me out the whole time. And it was a big deal to them, to the people I was training with, that I did it right and made them look good. So I was really like paranoid about that. And the whole chi thing, they taught me some meditation. They taught me some things to go along with it. But once again, they didn't do any of the iron hand stuff or iron head stuff with me. Their thought was, that takes a long time to learn how to do. You're not going to do it in 5 days, so forget it. So what was so interesting about the daily training there was the calisthenics, the running up the stairs and doing stuff on my knuckles. And I could do all that stuff. I had been used to that. So I'm running with all these kids. And remember, I'm a head taller than everybody because I'm the only adult, first off. Secondly, I'm an American, so I'm big and gangly. So we do all this like walking on our knuckles and running and sprinting, and okay, I could do all that. And then the instructor would go like, and we'd be running, and they'd all turn around and backflip in the air while running. So they'd run, turn around, backflip, and land on their feet and keep running. And I just stopped, and I was like, I can't do that. Like, I will break my neck. This is like over concrete too. I was like, I'm not doing that. So it was so funny because I could do all the stuff that required strength and endurance and all those things. But all the stuff that required their acrobatic ability, I didn't have any of that. So I'd be running with them, and then they'd call out something, and they would all like grab their foot and flip over. I can't do any of that stuff. So it was really interesting. So also the second day or first day of calisthenics, we had started going up a mountain. My tendons wouldn't do it. He had overstrained me the day before, and so I could athletically keep up. I wasn't that tired. It was as soon as we started going uphill, my ankles started killing me, that my Achilles tendon was killing me because the day before he had overstretched it. So that sucked. And I had to, and it shows, we showed it in the show that I couldn't go up the hill. And so I had to like walk around the hill or whatever it was. But what was always strange to me, that I always wondered about, is what the kids around me knew. Because I don't know what they told them about this big white guy training with a camera crew following him. I don't know if it was explained to them, if they were wondering what I was doing there, if they understood any of this stuff, because I stood out like a sore thumb. And I couldn't do any of the stuff they did. And all the stuff I could do, they didn't do. They didn't hit bags. They didn't do pad work. It was all flexibility and timing and acrobatic stuff is what they did. But they didn't actually hit a human being. They'd never done that before. So I had a really interesting kind of philosophical discussion with one of the kids while my translator was there. And he said, like, what do you do? And I said, my translator explained he fights people for money. And the kid who was a high school kid, I mean, he was like, 17-ish. He goes, why would you do that? And I said, why would you pretend to hit somebody all day and never hit them? And so it was so funny, this kind of like cultural divide between this person who had been training Kung Fu his whole life but had literally never hit a human being and didn't even know if he could do it, and me, who couldn't do any of his acrobatic stuff but I'd hit plenty of people. He didn't understand my philosophy of martial arts, that if it's not practical, why are you doing it? And I didn't understand, he didn't understand mine, which is why you would hurt somebody and get paid for it. So what was really interesting to me was the meditative quality up there, the peace up there, the flexibility and athleticism of everybody up there. It showed a lot of martial arts that weren't practical really, but were really great and really beautiful and really profound. And it really widened my eyes to martial arts has something for everybody, where it can be beautiful and acrobatic, and it can be visually really entertaining and stunning, and you can find a real sense of peace with it and never have to do the things I did, because if that's not your thing, that's not your thing, So like there's a piece of martial arts for everybody, and styles like Kung Fu in China really taught me that martial arts aren't always about combat. It's about whatever you find that's inside you that gives you something. And I had a meal there one time with the old monks, and they were all chanting at the same time. They were all chanting this I don't know if song is the right word for it, and they were all doing it in the same rhythm. And it was almost like a Gregorian chant, but Chinese, and it was incredible. And little moments like that were really amazing. And no one's allowed to speak during that thing. Everybody ate their meal in silence, except for this chant. And things like that were really cool and really profound. And I remember I was getting ready with this bow staff routine, and I was bungling a lot, but I was trying to get it memorized and all stuff. And the crew had left because it was nighttime. And a kid came up to my door and he knocks. And I opened the door and he goes, "Stick?" And I went, "Yeah, sure, stick." And he goes, "Come on." And he goes, "Follow me," basically. And remember, I don't speak Chinese. He doesn't speak English. And we got to the courtyard, and there were 3 of the kids, the older kids, and they each had a stick like mine. And they knew this routine I was doing by heart. They had it memorized. And so they, "Come on, like, do you want to start?" And he got in the starting position, and we all practiced it together. They wanted me to get it right, whether there were cameras there or not. They didn't care. And they said, "Come on, let's practice." And we did. Boom, boom, we practiced, So that was cool. So I would do things like that even after the crew was gone. I still live with these people. And so they would teach me stuff or show me stuff. And we didn't speak the language, but we could kind of instruct each other and have fun. One time there was a dinner back down in Dongfeng. And I think it was the dinner where he would, my instructor answered the phone and all that stuff. No, he wasn't with me, because this is what happened. Apparently there was a crew dinner down in the city, and I went there after shooting, had dinner with my producer and everything. They sent me back up to the temple, and it's locked. It's closed. They closed the front gate at whatever time it is, like 9 p.m. This is like 10:30. And it was crazy. I walk up to this door, and it's locked. And it's this huge wooden door, and there are these 2 demons on either side of it, and the whole thing is dark. And I'm like, oh, fuck. There's no cell service up there. I didn't have a cell phone with me, and I didn't know the head guy's number anyway. The van that dropped me off is gone, and I'm like, oh man, am I gonna spend the night out here? What the hell? And there was this huge knocker, like this iron thing, and I was like, dong, dong, dong. And then I waited a few minutes, and the drill sergeant guy who was in charge of the kids opens the door. He's like, "Oh, come on in. Like, I was like, oh, he's gonna be so pissed. I'm here, like, kind of after lights out or whatever. And he's like, no, come on in. I understand. I came in and went to bed, but standing in front of that door is really intimidating. So, anyway, I did drills after hours, whenever possible, because I really wanted to get that stick thing down. And I would hear these stories about people with iron hands and iron necks. That's a thing there, where they would literally hang themselves in like lotus position, and they would do the same where they practice their neck to get their neck so strong that it didn't hurt their necks. And there were still all these pictures all over the place of these monks, my instructor included, doing this crazy stuff, standing on their head in lotus position, just the top of their head. I mean, it's crazy. So I learned a lot of the meditation, a lot of the spiritual side of it. So about my 3rd or 4th day there, they brought in, because no one at that school did Sanda or Sanchu. Nobody. So they brought in a ringer from another school to spar with me. And one of the problems we had, which will become a factor later in the story, it was hard finding equipment for me, because number one, I'm really big by Chinese standards, and B, the equipment there was really cheap. It wasn't that good, the stuff they sold in Dongfeng, China. So they got this equipment for me, kind of headgear or whatever, and gloves, and they brought in this gigantic dude from another school, and they set out a mat, and then they had the kids sit around the mat to kind of ring it. And they said, okay, you're going to spar this guy from this other school who's a Sanda champion or something. And I went, okay, great. That I know how to do. Like, that I'm good with. Have me fight somebody. And what was so interesting about it is they lined me up with this big guy. We bow, and they say, go. And I tagged this dude up really good. And what was so funny about it is seeing all these kids that I had been with for 3 or 4 days by this point, like this light bulb went on over their heads, like, oh, that's what this guy can do. Because they hadn't seen me do anything for days except trip all over myself and drop this staff and just not be able to do any of their flexibility stuff. So they probably thought I couldn't do anything. I don't think anybody told them this guy's a fighter and he's here doing this TV show. I don't know. And so I finally did something where they all went, oh, this guy does do martial arts. He just does it in a different way than we do it. So they brought this big Chinese dude, and we sparred, and I did fine, and so that was my only preparation for the Sanda fight, was sparring that one guy. And then they had an older student one time, there was a bag out there, and he showed me a sidekick that he liked. And that was it. That was pretty much my only preparation for the final fight. This was the only episode that I can think of that the final fight had almost nothing to do with my training. Where I trained the stick stuff and the flexibility training, all the spiritual training, which was a lot of fun, but the final fight had nothing to do with any of those things. We didn't train Sanda. I didn't train on an elevated platform. I didn't know the dimensions I was fighting on. I just had no idea. So this was the only one I can think of. There were some that were a little off, like we didn't have much to do with the final fight. This is the only one where it had nothing to do with the final fight. Nothing I did had anything to do with the final fight. So, I did all the training I could, and by the end, I had healed up enough that I felt I could fight okay, but I still wasn't great. But, it was what it was. I go back down to the city, I meet up with Doug, and on my way out of the temple, once again, they had the kids lining the stairs all the way down. And I walk down someone, and I look back up, and my instructor's at the top of the staircase. And he raises his hand, and he says a sentence in Chinese. And my translator's standing there, and he says, if you never do Kung Fu again, that's okay. You just be a good person. Yeah, that was cool. That was just a cool visual, cool moment. This guy at the top of the stairs saying goodbye and saying, hey, be a good person. Don't worry about doing anything else other than that. That was his philosophy. It was really interesting. Also, they brought in a really high-def camera, because usually we have these little tiny cameras that, were okay, but they weren't the big, jib cameras. They brought in one for him to do like his forms with the stick and with his hands to really capture how skilled he was. And they wanted a really good camera that could really catch everything. And watching this guy go was really amazing. Not just his ability with the staff and stick was incredible, but his flexibility and the forms and the katas, and he did everything with real power. And he had a real ability. And seeing that, and this guy's much older than I am, it was great, man. It was really cool to see that. And I have tremendous respect for him to this day, for his abilities and his ability to teach, and his philosophical outlook was really amazing. So, anyway, I go back down to the city, meet up with Doug, and we went over our experiences. And he had done a lot more Sanda stuff. He had done a lot more Iron Hand stuff and Iron Head stuff. Meaning, people in his school, there was one guy who had like the Iron Head, which is they would take these metal things and slam them against their head and break them. And they would do this brick stuff where the guys would break bricks. And I met a couple of people with the Iron Hand, and their hands were all knotted, where they had, let's say, iron knuckle, and they hit with this. These two knuckles would be all jacked up and have these huge pads on them. One guy, he broke bricks and with the side of his hand, and the whole side of his hand was just all calloused and knotted and just huge because he broke bricks with it all the time. That was their thing. And they taught Doug a couple of the tricks to how to break the bricks. And there's a little sleight of hand involved. I'm not going to give anything away, but they went through all the tricks with Doug. So anyway, I didn't go through any of that. So the final fight was the next day, and I was a little stressed out because there were 3 parts to the final fight. There was a staff demonstration, there was a chi thing, no idea what that was, and then a Sanda fight. Well, I only done one of those 3 things. They had talked about the chi stuff, but I hadn't done any of it. And then I only sparred the one guy for the Sanda fight. So a little background. This is going to be a consistent theme in FightQuest. The final showdown, the final fight, there was almost always like this ceremony thing where our masters would be standing there and all the students would be standing there, and they would do this like, okay, you're now ready type thing. That usually took a long time. This, remember, has 3 parts to it. It took hours in the blazing sun. It was really hot when we were there. And the people we were fighting, I looked over and they were like, oh, that's the guy you're fighting. And he was in the shade doing nothing. You know, he wasn't part of this school, so he wasn't in the demonstration. He had nothing to do with any of that stuff. So he didn't do anything. He's sitting in the shade, and we are like standing on the heat, frying. And it's, it takes a few takes to do all this stuff with the lines and everything. They want to get a lot of camera angles. So that little ceremony you see at the end of me and Doug standing there with our masters, that was like a 3-hour ordeal. And I had to do the staff thing a couple times, then the chi thing, and then finally the fight. Our opponents didn't have to do any of that stuff. So our opponents are just worried about the final fight. They didn't start warming up 3 hours early. So anyway, right. So I did the staff thing, and it worked out pretty well. I was actually really impressed with my ability to do the staff thing, considering it was really hard for me. So now we're going to do the chi demonstration. And Doug was going to break a brick, and they're standing there thinking, what are we going to do with Jimmy? Because they really didn't teach me how to do any of that stuff. And there was, it's funny now, there was a huge division. I think it was my instructor said, if you have good chi, if you have good energy, and you're physically prepared, you can do any of this stuff. It doesn't matter. The other instructor, I think it was Doug's instructor, said if you haven't been drilling this stuff for a lot of years, you're not going to be able to do any of it. Jimmy's going to get hurt. So there was this I don't think an argument between them, but my fixer was like, yeah, Doug's instructor says if you try and do this stuff, you aren't not prepared for it. It's going to mess you up. My instructor says, as long as you have good chi and good ability, you'll be fine. And so the producers are trying to figure out what to do with me. And I think I came up with the idea. In the final version, you see bricks stacked on my stomach, and they hit it with a sledgehammer and break all the bricks. I think it was my idea, if I remember correctly, because with all the brick breaking stuff, if I hadn't done it before, I didn't want to screw up and break a knuckle in my hand. My logic was, I have a strong core from just years of martial arts and jiu-jitsu and stuff. I could always take a shot to the gut really well. So I thought, worst comes to worst, and something goes wrong and I get slammed in the stomach, it's a pretty good place for me to get hit. So I actually suggested, can we do something with my stomach, where iron stomach type thing. And so they stacked up all these bricks, and they said, we're going to hit you with a sledgehammer. And once again, I think it was Doug's instructor was like, that's not safe. And my instructor was like, Jimmy will be fine. He's he's a strong guy, he'll be fine. And there's a picture I used to have, I'll see if I can find it, if I can put it up somewhere, of one of my producers, who's a friend of mine, in front of me with all these bricks, and they're ready to go, doing this to a camera. She thought I was going to get killed. She was like, and also, not to mention, if they mess up and the sledgehammer doesn't hit the bricks and smashes me in the head, I'm done. Because this dude is going over his head with a sledgehammer. He really went for it. And if he's low, he's going to crush my nuts. And if he's high, he's going to crush my head. I don't know which is worse. But there was also that they could miss and, crush my chest plate, right? So I just laid there and was like, all right, I guess we'll do it. And I laid there and I just flexed my stomach and, tried to concentrate a little. Like getting punched in the stomach, or, Muay Thai drills when you're kneeing each other in the stomach. Same type thing. So I just breathed out. He smashes it. They all break, and I sit up, and it looked great on camera. It looked fantastic. So I got very lucky with that one. So all that stuff's finally over. They're ready for the Sanda fight. And once again, this is after 3 hours in the sun. Doug and I are both exhausted by this point because we've had to do all this stuff and say our lines over and over or whatever. And the final part was the hardest part, the fight. So they gave us our equipment. The mouthpiece they gave me was like that big. It only went like that far, and I couldn't, I have a big jaw. I couldn't fit it in my mouth. So I said, fuck it. And I threw it away. So they bring out the thing we're going to fight on, and it was literally, I'm not joking, like a lumpy mattress. I couldn't move at all on the thing. Like my feet kept getting caught, and I would trip. And it wasn't a flat surface. It wasn't smooth like a wrestling mat or a boxing ring. It was nothing like that. It was lumpy. I don't know how much you can see in the show. You have to look at it again. But it was like a lumpy mattress. So they gear us up. They stand me there with this dude. And I remember thinking just get through this fight. You can't move on this thing. You're exhausted. That's the way it goes. And I I freaking went out there and squared up with this guy. And I remember thinking, just get it over with. Okay, this is going to just like, all right, do the best you can. Oh, man, I'm tired. And they went, go, and the dude threw a high kick, and it smashed one of them. I still have it to this day. I have a cracked molar right here because I didn't have a mouthpiece in. And he kind of went around my guard and caught me right here and went, ksh. If you've ever had a cracked molar or a cracked tooth, suddenly there's sand in your mouth. That's what suddenly there was sand in my mouth. And I went, mother. And I went, okay. And I just charged dude and threw him right off the platform. Because you could push the guy off the platform, you could throw him off too. So I just like, all right, fine. And I just went after the guy. And I remember that became my strategy. Just throw punches, boom, boom, boom. When he got in bad position, throw him off. And I remember looking down at the camera woman, and I caught one of these dude's kicks, and I lifted him up, and I looked down. There was a camera lady, and she's filming us, and I went, sorry. And I threw him right at because she just happened to be in the direction I was throwing. I didn't know she was there. So I threw him right at the camera, right off this thing. So that was fun. But I remember thinking like, oh, God, this sucks. Why am I here? Boom. And just going, okay, it's on. Got to fight. It's just the way it goes. So I went after the guy and threw him off a few times. And it was like kickboxing with some throws in it. And it was fun. But I had no mobility on that thing. It was really crazy. But so it was kind of like learning Sanda on the fly was how it went. And so the final fight was over. And Chinese custom was, they just raised both of our hands, good for you kind of thing, rather than having an actual Sanda match. So a lot of fun. But it was my first experience with a traditional martial art and making something combative out of a style that wasn't inherently combative. Meaning, Kung Fu itself, they didn't really do much combat. So we had Sanda to fall back on. We had Sanchu to fall back on. In future episodes, we wouldn't have that. We would have a traditional style where they didn't really fight, and we had to do something about it. So China was the first time we had a traditional style, but we had a kind of a way out, and there was a fighting style that was related to it. But it would be an issue later on for other styles that were more esoteric or more about demonstration than combat. And China was our first hint kind of what we would have to deal with later with that. But I had a great time. And, another funny side story I forgot. They made a scroll for me that I still have up in my house that had the date I was there and all this stuff. And it was this huge scroll, and he made it by hand, my instructor. And because Chinese calligraphy is a thing for them that he knew really, really well. And I saw him make it, and it was amazing to watch. I did one of the characters. He kind of like held my hand, and I did one of the characters myself, and it's awful. But he made this amazing scroll for me. And at the end of our fight, he gave it to me. That was my gift, and it was awesome. Shida Young, my instructor, wasn't the normal abbot of the temple I was staying in. There was another abbot who usually did it and wasn't there. And so he was kind of taking it over for a while. That abbot, who was kind of his master, showed up and invited me to tea. Big, huge deal for me to be invited to tea with these guys. So my instructor and then his instructor, I think, that was the relationship, I'm not quite sure, had this tea, and we were supposed to have tea. They were going to get footage of this. And then we had a meeting somewhere down in the city. It might have been my reunification with Doug. So, which is kind of a big deal. A few cameras there and everything. The tea took too long. And so it was hilarious to me personally. The cameraman knows we only have an hour to do this tea or whatever. And they got footage of me drinking the tea and then making the scroll and all that stuff. Don't know if it made the show. And the abbot, the abbot of the temple, usually this ancient monk, you can't tell him to hurry up. So we're sitting there having this tea, and the cameraman is talking to the translator, and he's going, dude, we have to leave. Like, we only have an hour. We got to go. And the translator goes, I can't tell him to hurry up. Like, Chinese culture doesn't allow me to go, hey, get going. I can't do that. So I remember off in the corner, like, having this argument, or not like discussion, where the producer is trying to like hurry it up. You don't hurry it up with two 16th generation monks. You just can't do that. And my translator explaining to him, like, no, I can't tell them. It's like tea with Gandhi. You can't tell him to hurry up. Like, I can't, that's not possible. So I thought it was hilarious because I don't care what time we get there. It does, no problem for me. But the shooter was like, come on, we got to go. And I'm like, the guy invited me to tea, I'm having tea. So it was one of those collisions of culture that happened sometimes when we were shooting, where you could tell the producer would tell somebody, a translator or whatever, hey, tell him to do this. And the translator was like, I can't do that. I can't tell him to do something. I can ask really politely, but if he says no, and that's it. I got to shut up. So that was one of the first time we had really dealt with that as well. It was kind of interesting. But cultural shock, but it led to a really fun episode. And one of those experiences that I'll never forget. Oh, also, another story I forgot. There was a scene that I don't know if it made the show, but they did like a behind the scenes thing of it, where behind the temple there was this like path, and it went up to like a radio tower somewhere up there, like some kind of utility thing, and someone had put up a basketball court there. We literally were doing something else, scouting something else, and found this basketball court. And the producer had the idea of taking some of the kids up there to play basketball, because basketball was getting big in China at the time because of Yao Ming. And it was actually one of the few sports that if you turn on TV, you can usually find basketball. And so the Chinese kids had heard of it and liked it, but had never been taught how to play it. I used to be a teacher, and when I was substitute teaching, one of the things you end up teaching is PE. And so I took a bunch of the kids up there with a basketball and put them through like the PE drills you would have to teach in school. So dribbling and passing and all this stuff and getting them how to do it. And then I kind of explained to them the rules, and I said, go for it. And they made like a 5-on-5 team. Once they figured out how to do it, that, you put the ball through the hoop. These kids had been training their whole lives in all this acrobatic stuff. They could jump so high and they would flip. So they would kind of like jump over one another rather than like dribble and layup. They really didn't do that. They were like, I'll just jump over him. So they were like slam dunking and like doing these crazy passes and all this athletic stuff because they knew how to do that. They didn't know how to play basketball, but they knew how to like leap over one another. So it was the craziest thing ever to see these trained monk kids who were these incredible martial artists playing basketball for the first time. And somebody put on one of the message boards or something that it was like, that's fake. There's no way there was actually a basketball hoop. There really was actually a basketball. This path near the temple, there was this basketball hoop, and we literally stumbled across it. And they came up with the idea of, hey, let's just put the kids out there and it'd be a fun little side thing. So that was 100% real, not fake at all, and it was a ton of fun. Monks playing basketball. I call it March Monk Madness. It was fantastic, but had a great time. So if you guys enjoy this, I'll do the next one, which I gotta look up. Let me see here real quick. The next one is Tokyo, Japan, Kyokushin. That was a fun episode. Next one, you'll hear all about it. Thanks.